And now we come to the book of Leviticus. Leviticus is one of the strangest books of the Bible. What is it about? It's about holiness. And it's about, especially for us, it's a rather strange. It is about how God laid out the rules so that the Israelites could be holy and therefore they could worship and come into his presence.
The Old Testament isn't intended for anybody other than Israel. He fulfilled the Levitical law already. He is our sacrifice.
Much said about God's mercy, much said about his grace. There is a great emphasis on the fact that God forgives, that he empowers. Almost nothing is said about the law of God, about the judgment of God, about the heinousness of violating his law and the just consequences of such a violation. And so, in a sense, the gospel, which means the good news, is stripped of what is really good because people don't know what is really bad, which makes the good news such good news.
Welcome to Diggin Deeper, a simple Bible study where we dig deeper into the Word of God. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish. For today's study, we turn to a new book, the book of Leviticus. Today's study takes place in the 4th chapter of Leviticus. Leviticus is the 3rd book of the Torah and the Old Testament to provide instruction and laws to guide a sinful people. However, as we have witnessed through the first 2 books of the Bible, God redeemed humanity time and time again. And the same is still true today, but it requires a relationship with a holy God. Leviticus Chapter 4 is made up of 35 verses beginning with verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a soul shall sin through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and shall do against any of them, if the priest that is anointed do sin according to the sin of the people, then let him bring for his sin, which he hath sinned, a young bullock without blemish unto the Lord for a sin offering. And he shall bring the bullock unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, and shall lay his hand upon the bullock's head, and kill the bullock before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall take of the bullock's blood, and bring it to the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour all the blood of the bullock at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock for the sin offering, the fat that covereth the inwards, and all the fat that is upon the inwards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks. And the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away, as it was taken off from the bullock of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar of the burnt offering. And the skin of the bullock, and all his flesh, with his head, and with his legs, and his inwards, and his dung, even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without the camp unto a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out shall he be burnt. And if the whole congregation of Israel sin through ignorance, and the thing be hid from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which should not be done, and are guilty when the sin, which they have sinned against it, is known, then the congregation shall offer a young bullock for the sin, and bring him before the tabernacle of the congregation. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands upon the head of the bullock before the Lord, and the bullock shall be killed before the Lord. And the priest that is anointed shall bring of the bullock's blood to the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall dip his finger in some of the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, even before the veil. And he shall put some of the blood upon the horns of the altar which is before the Lord, that is in the tabernacle of the congregation, and shall pour out all the blood at the bottom of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he shall take all his fat from him, and burn it upon the altar. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a sin offering. So shall he do with this, and the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. And he shall carry forth the bullock without the camp, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. It is a sin offering for the congregation. When a ruler hath sinned, and done somewhat through ignorance against any of the commandments of the Lord his God concerning things which should not be done, and is guilty, or if his sin, wherein he hath sinned, come to his knowledge, he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a male without blemish, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of the goat, and kill it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out his blood at the bottom of the altar of burnt offering. And he shall burn all his fat upon the altar, as the fat of the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall make an atonement for him as concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. And if any one of the common people sin through ignorance, while he doeth somewhat against any of the commandments of the Lord concerning things which ought not to be done, and be guilty, or if his sin, which he hath sinned, come to his knowledge, then he shall bring his offering, a kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he hath sinned. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. And the priest shall take of the blood thereof with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar. And he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat is taken away from off the sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar for a sweet savor unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. And if he bring a lamb for a sin offering, he shall bring it a female without blemish. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and slay it for a sin offering in the place where they kill the burnt offering. And the priest shall take of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it upon the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and shall pour out all the blood thereof at the bottom of the altar, and he shall take away all the fat thereof, as the fat of the lamb is taken away from the sacrifice of the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar, according to the offerings made by fire unto the Lord. And the priest shall make an atonement for his sin that he hath committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Leviticus Chapter 4 verse 1 begins with God speaking to Moses, instructing him about the procedures for sin offerings. The stage is being set for the detailed instructions that outline the process for making a sin offering when someone unintentionally violates a commandment. The instructions are specific for different categories of sinners, including the anointed priest, the whole congregation of Israel, and the ruler of the people. The purpose is to provide a means of atonement and forgiveness for unintentional sins. Verse 2 states even if a person commits a sin without realizing it, or with no intention to disobey, they are still accountable under God's law, which illustrates the importance of adhering to God's laws, and the need for a sin offering even for unintentional sins, indicating that divine justice applies to all actions, intentional or not. In other words, if someone unintentionally commits a sin against any of God's commandments, they must bring an offering to make atonement for their mistake, which emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and making amends for sins, regardless of whether they were intentional or not. Verse 4 explains that the high priest, who is anointed and set apart for service, commits an unintentional sin that affects the whole community. He must offer a young bull as a sin offering to make atonement for his mistake. The bull must be without defect, symbolizing the purity required for the offering, which is meant to cleanse the priest and the community from the consequences of the priest's unintentional sin. In verse 4, the anointed priest must bring a young bull without defect as a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He is to present the bull at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. The priest then lays his hand on the bull's head and slaughters it there before the Lord. This action symbolizes the transfer of the priest's sin to the animal, which will then be used as a sacrifice to atone for the sin. Verse 5 instructs the anointed priest to take some of the blood from a bull that has been sacrificed as a sin offering and carry it into the tent of meeting, which was the sanctuary where God's presence was believed to dwell. This act is part of a larger ritual that involves atonement for unintentional sins committed by the entire community, the high priest, or a leader. The blood is used to make atonement on the altar, symbolizing the purification and forgiveness of sins. Verse 6 instructs the priest to dip his finger in the blood of the offering and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, in front of the veil of the sanctuary. This act symbolizes the transfer of sin from the individual to the offering, which is then presented to God for atonement. The veil represents the separation between the holy place and the most holy place where God's presence dwelled. By sprinkling the blood in front of the veil, the priest acknowledges that the sin offering is presented to God and seeks His forgiveness and acceptance. Verse 7, the priest is to take some of the blood from the bull and apply it to the horns of the altar of fragrant incense, which is located inside the tent of meeting before the Lord. The rest of the blood is then poured out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is situated at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Verse 8 specifically details the removal of fat from the bull used in the sin offering, the fat that covers the internal organs and is attached to them is to be carefully removed by the priest. The verse does serve as a reminder for Christians to offer their best to God in their daily lives, recognizing that everything they have comes from Him. It encourages believers to approach God with reverence and to take their relationship with Him seriously. Verse 9, the priest is instructed to take the 2 kidneys, along with the fat that is on them, and the long lobe of the liver, which should be removed with the kidneys. The removal and burning of these organs symbolize the surrender of one's will and decision-making to God. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, the liver was often used in divination practices, but in the Israelite sacrificial system, it was dedicated to God, indicating a rejection of pagan practices and a commitment to Yahweh. Verse 10 describes how the priest is to take the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting, lay his hand on the bull's head, and then slaughter it before the Lord. Afterward, he is to take some of the bull's blood and carry it into the tent of meeting, where he will dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. Verse 11 describes the procedure for handling the remains of a bull used as a sin offering. The procedure included after the bull is sacrificed, and its blood is used for the ritual, the hide, all the flesh, the head, the legs, the entrails, and the waist of the bull are to be taken to a ceremonially clean place outside the camp and burned on with fire. The burning of the remains outside the camp signifies the separation of sin from the holy space of the community, emphasizing the importance of purification and the need to distance oneself from sin. Verse 12 explains, after the priest has taken some of the bull's blood into the tent of meeting and applied it as prescribed, the rest of the bull, including its hide, meat, head, shanks, inner organs, and dung, must be taken outside the camp to a clean place designated for the disposal of ashes, where it is to be burned on with fire. This ritual emphasizes the need to remove the physical remnants of the sin offering from the sacred area, symbolizing the complete separation of sin from the community and the sanctuary. Verse 13 states, if the whole congregation commits an error, and the mistake goes unnoticed, and they commit something the Lord has commanded not to be done, they must bring a young bull as a sin offering. This offering is to be presented before the tent of meeting, and the elders of the congregation lay their hands on the bull's head, symbolizing the transfer of the congregation's guilt to the animal. Verses 14 and 15 describe, if the whole community commits a sin that is not known to them, and they later become aware of their guilt, they must bring a bull as a sin offering. The elders of the community lay their hands on the bull's head, symbolizing their acknowledgement of the sin and their acceptance of the consequences. The bull is then slaughtered, and the blood is used in a ritual to make atonement for the congregation. Again, this act symbolizes the transfer of guilt from the congregation to the bull, which is then sacrificed as a sin offering. Verse 16 states that the high priest is to bring a bull as a sin offering to the Lord. This offering is to be made for the sin committed, and it involves the high priest taking some of the bull's blood into the holy place and applying it to the horns of the altar of incense. Verse 17 describes action that is part of a larger ritual where a priest, after offering a bull as a sin offering, takes some of the bull's blood into the sanctuary. The priest then dips his finger in the blood and sprinkles it 7 times in front of the veil of the sanctuary. This act symbolizes the transfer of the sins from the people to the sanctuary, and ultimately to God, through the mediation of the priest. Further, as in verse 18, the ritual emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and atoning for unintentional sins, ensuring that the community remains spiritually pure and in right standing with God. Verse 19 states that the priest is to remove all the fat from the bull used as the offering and burn it on the altar. This action is part of the detailed procedure for making atonement for unintentional sins committed by the whole community of Israel. The fat, considered the best part of the animal, is dedicated to God, symbolizing the offering of the best to the divine. The offering was made outside the camp to show that the memory of the sin was removed from the people, as the blood of the offering was sprinkled 7 times before the Lord. Verse 20 explains that the priest is to perform the same ritual with the bull as was done for the previous sin offering. This involves transferring the sins onto the bull and then sacrificing it. The priest then makes atonement for the individuals or congregation, and their sins are forgiven. The ritual looks like this. The bull is slaughtered, and some of its blood is taken into the tent of meeting, where the blood is used to sprinkle it 7 times in front of the curtain of the sanctuary. Blood is also placed on the horns of the altar and poured out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, and the fat of the bull is removed and burned on the altar. Verse 21 states that the person responsible for the sin offering must carry the bull outside the camp and burn it, just as the first bull was burned. This act symbolizes the removal of sin from the community. Verse 22, when a leader realizes their guilt for an unintentional sin, they are to bring a young bull as a sin offering. This passage emphasizes that leaders, despite their elevated status, are subject to the same divine laws, and must seek atonement for their sins just as anyone else would. Here, we see that there is no exemption of people from atonement and righting of wrongs regardless of status as leaders, and despite their elevated status, are not exempt from the requirements of atonement and the pursuit of holiness. Verse 23 states that if a person realizes they have sinned, they must bring a male goat without defect as an offering. We cannot forget what this verse is telling us, as the ritual underscores the importance of recognizing and atoning for one's sins, even for those in positions of authority, and highlights the need for a perfect offering to make atonement for sin. Verse 24 addresses the procedure for bringing a young bull as a sin offering. The ruler is instructed to bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting, where the priest will lay his hand on the bull's head to transfer the guilt of the sin onto the animal. We need to understand the offering described here is meant to atone for the unintentional sin of a ruler, ensuring that they can be restored to a right relationship with God. What I like about this particular verse, and the outlining of specific measurements, is that there is atonement for everyone, for unintentional sins committed by different categories of people, including the whole congregation, the leader, and the common person. We are all one. Verse 25 explains a ruler's sin offering, depicted as a kid of the goats, illustrates that while he bore influence, he was not above the law. This reflects a foundational aspect of the covenant relationship that continues to resonate in our faith practices today. Verse 26 explains how the priest is to burn all the fat of the sacrifice on the altar, similar to the fat of a peace offering. This ritual burning symbolizes the leader's atonement for the sin, and the priest then makes atonement for the leader, ensuring forgiveness. Verse 27 illustrates further people are still guilty of unintentional sins, and that they can atone for those sins by offering a goat as a sacrifice. This verse helps people realize that they may have blind spots in their lives where they are not obeying God. Verse 28 states a person who commits a sin and becomes aware of it must bring an unblemished female goat as an offering. The offering of a female goat without defect symbolizes the necessity of bringing the best to God, and the importance of purity in the process of seeking forgiveness. Verse 29 describes the ritual for making atonement for unintentional sins committed by an ordinary member of the congregation. According to the verse, when a person becomes aware of their unintentional sin, they are to bring a female goat without defect as an offering. The person must lay their hand on the head of the goat, symbolizing the transfer of their guilt to the animal. And then the goat is to be slaughtered at the place of the burnt offering. The act of laying one's hand on the head of the animal to be sacrificed symbolizes the transfer of the sinner's guilt to the animal. The animal is then slaughtered in the same place where burnt offerings are made. This location is significant because it is where the presence of God is acknowledged, and it is believed that the sacrifice can be properly presented to God for forgiveness. Verse 30 explains a priest is instructed to take some of the blood of a sacrificial animal with his finger and apply it to the horns of the altar of burnt offering. The rest of the blood is to be poured out at the base of the altar. Gill's exposition of the entire Bible explains of, and the priest shall take of the blood, so that all the preceding actions, the bringing the offering, the putting the hand upon the head of it, and slaying it, were done by the man that sinned of this, and what follows here, and in the next verse. Verse 31 emphasizes the importance of the fat being burned as part of the ritual, which is a significant aspect of the sacrificial system described in Leviticus. This process underscores the idea that the offering serves as a means of atonement and reconciliation with God. Verse 32 explains if an individual chooses to bring a lamb as their sin offering, it must be a female lamb without any defects. The person bringing the offering places their hand on the lamb's head before it is slaughtered, symbolizing the transfer of their sin to the animal. This verse also reflects God's accessibility, showing that He provided a way for people of different means to bring a sin offering, whether it was a bull, goat, or lamb. However, the standard of the offering being without defect was consistent, emphasizing that all offerings to God must reflect sincerity, respect, and a recognition of His holiness. Verse 33 describes a ritual for offering a sin offering, where the person bringing the offering lays their hand on the head of the animal and then kills it. This ritual is performed in the same place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Verse 34 explains the priest is to take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and apply it to the horns of the altar of burnt offering. The remaining blood is then poured out at the base of the altar. The act of applying the blood to the altar symbolizes the transfer of the individual's sins to the altar, where they are symbolically dealt with through the offering. Verse 35 the priest is to remove all the fat from the bull used in the sin offering, similar to how the fat is removed from a lamb in peace offerings. The fat is then burned on the altar, placed on top of the Lord's food offerings. Charles Spurgeon had several explanations of the sacrifices spoken of in the last several verses. It is true the sins of great men cover a larger space, but yet there must be a bloody sacrifice for the smallest offenses. For the sins of a housewife, or of a servant, of a peasant, or of a crossing sweeper, there must be the same sacrifice as for the sins of the greatest and most influential sometimes, according to the rabbis. Those who brought the victim leaned with all their might, and pressed upon it as if they seemed to say by the act, I put the whole burden, weight, and force of my sin upon this unblemished victim. O my soul, lean hard on Christ, throw all the weight of thy sin upon Him. For He is able to bear it, and came on purpose to bear it, and the constant reference to blood is unmistakable. There are many ways by which men may die without the shedding of blood, the capital punishment of our own country is free from this accompaniment. But our Savior was ordained to die by a death in which the shedding of blood was conspicuous, as if to link Him forever with those sacrifices which were made as types and symbols of His great atoning work. We have reached the end of our Bible study today for Leviticus chapter 3. I am excited to be in a new book of the Bible, and we have finished the first 4 chapters of Leviticus. I am thankful for each of you for continuing to tune into the program with me. We are beginning to put together an impressive list of programs. The first 2 books of the Bible have been really fun to learn, and really deep, but there is so much more to come. There is no telling what the next studies will reveal, so join us next time for our Bible study here on Diggin Deeper, as we simply dig deeper into the Word of God. Before we go, if you liked what you just watched, like and share our content. It really helps us grow. And think about subscribing to our channel, which will help you keep up to date with all of our content. Once again, I am your host, Billy Ray Parrish, and until next time, thank you for joining us. Stay safe and God bless.